At 16, my parents told me I was no longer their daughter. At 27, they told me they needed my kidney to survive. I want you to sit with that for a second before I say anything else. At 16, my parents told me I was no longer their daughter. At 27, they told me they needed my kidney to survive. I want you to sit with that for a second before I say anything else. Because this story is not what you think it is. It is not a story about anger, even though anger is in it. It is not a story about forgiveness, even though forgiveness is in it too. It is a story about a question, the hardest question I have ever been asked, and what it cost me to answer it. I am going to tell you everything. And by the end, I think you are going to have an opinion. Most people do. My name is Nora. And on the morning the letter arrived, I was 27 years old, and my life was genuinely, honestly, without performance, good. I had an apartment I had chosen myself, in a city my parents had never visited, with a plant on the windowsill that I had somehow kept alive for 3 years, which felt like proof of something I couldn't quite name. I had Marcus, 4 years together, and he was the kind of person who made coffee before you asked, and remembered the things you mentioned once and never brought up again unless you did first. I had a job I was proud of. I had friends who showed up. I had built, out of nothing and entirely on my own, a life that felt like mine in a way that I understand now not everyone gets to feel. I say all of this not to perform contentment. I say it because you need to understand what was at stake when that envelope landed on my doormat. You need to know what was in the room before it arrived. I have one rule I have kept without breaking for 11 years. I do not open mail I do not recognize. Anything without a name I know, I throw it directly away. I made that rule at 17, standing at a pay phone in the rain, and I have never once violated it. Until the Tuesday in March when I did. I recognized the handwriting before I recognized anything else about it. I hadn't seen it in 11 years. But handwriting is the kind of thing that lives in your body rather than your memory. Your hands know it before your brain does. I stood at my kitchen counter, still in my coat, and I read it. And then I read it again. And then I sat down, very carefully, as if the floor had become uncertain. I have told this story to therapists, to Marcus, to one very patient friend at 2 in the morning. But I have never told it the way I am about to tell it now, without softening anything. I was 16. It was a Sunday in November, and we had eaten dinner, and the dishes were done, and my father asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. I remember that specifically, that he asked me to sit, like the conversation was going to be something that required a chair. He told me there were things he would and would not accept under his roof. He listed them carefully. He was not a screaming man. That is something people always find surprising when I tell this story. He was calm. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed the conversation and are committed to finishing it. I will not tell you exactly what the reason was. Not because I am ashamed of it. I gave up shame about it a long time ago. But because the specific reason has never been the point. The point is that I was 16 years old and my father looked at me across a kitchen table and decided that who I was did not fit inside the life he had planned. And that was enough for him. My mother sat at the other end of the table. She did not speak, not once. I looked at her twice, not to beg, I want to be clear about that just to see. Both times she looked at the table. He told me I had until morning to pack what I needed. I did not argue. I went upstairs and I packed one bag, the things that were actually mine, the things nobody had given me, and I went to sleep. I don't know how, I just did. In the morning, I carried my bag to the end of the driveway. It was early enough that the street was still quiet. I turned around to look at the house one last time. The porch light was on. Through the kitchen window, I could see my mother standing at the sink. We looked at each other for a long moment across the yard. Then she pulled the curtain, and I walked. I did not call them. They did not call me. That silence became a year. The year became 5. The 5 became 11. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring somewhere around year 3, or I told myself I did. What I know now is that you do not stop waiting. You just stop checking. People hear that story and they want me to tell them it broke me. And the honest answer is, it did, just not permanently. The first year was the hardest and also the most clarifying. When you have nothing, you find out very quickly what you are actually made of. I stayed with a friend for 2 months, then a teacher from school who had noticed something in me that I had not yet noticed in myself. She let me sleep in her guest room, and she never once made me feel like a project. I finished school. I worked nights at a diner and days at a pharmacy, and I saved enough to rent a room in a shared house in a city 3 hours from the one I had grown up in. I chose that distance deliberately, far enough that I would not run into anyone who knew my parents, close enough that I had not completely erased myself. I learned to do everything alone that most people learn from their families: how to negotiate a lease, how to cook something other than pasta, how to sit with a doctor in a waiting room and not have anyone to call afterward, how to be sick with nobody, how to be proud of yourself with nobody. That second one is harder than people think. Then Marcus. We met when I was 23, at a job I no longer have, over a disagreement about the right way to make coffee. He was wrong and I told him so, and he laughed and asked for my number. 4 years later, he still makes it wrong and I have stopped correcting him because the wrong way has become the way that means him. I built a life that had no room for the people who had left me outside in November with a single bag. That was not a punishment. It was just the only architecture that made sense. There is a box at the top of my closet. Old photographs, a birthday card from before. I have moved it to 4 different apartments and I have never once opened it. I don't know what that means. I have been asked by 3 separate therapists and I have given 3 separate answers, none of which felt completely true. 6 months before the letter arrived, I dreamed about my mother for the first time in years. I woke up and lay in the dark and felt something I still cannot name precisely. Not longing, not anger, something older than both of those things. 3 weeks later, the envelope. The letter was 2 pages. My mother's handwriting, both pages. My father's name appeared 11 times. His name was not at the bottom. She had signed it alone. My father's kidneys were failing. That was the medical fact at the center of the letter, delivered in the 3rd paragraph, after 2 paragraphs about how she hoped I was well and how the years had passed. She said his prognosis without a transplant was serious. She said the waiting list was long. She said that family members were often the best candidates for compatibility. She did not say my name in that sentence. She did not need to. She apologized once. 1 sentence in the middle of the 2nd page, compressed into something so small it was almost worse than nothing. It said, "I know things did not end the way they should have. 11 years of silence." 1 sentence. Did not end the way they should have, as if the ending was something that had simply happened to all of us equally, like weather. She did not mention the porch. She did not mention November. She wrote as if there was a relationship to draw on, as if the request was not extraordinary, as if I were a daughter who had simply moved away and fallen out of touch, rather than a teenager who had been asked to leave before the sun came up. I read it twice standing at the counter. Then I sat down, still in my coat, and I read it a third time. Then I put it on the kitchen table and I called Marcus and told him to come home. 3 days after the letter, a doctor named Dr. Osai called. Transplant coordinator. Warm, professional, completely unaware that every statistic he recited was landing on a person who had been put out of her family home at 16 with a bag and no warning. He was simply doing his job. That made it worse somehow. He was kind, and he had no idea what he was asking me to hold. Marcus came home and found me at the kitchen table, coat still on, letter open in front of me. He read it without asking. He sat down across from me and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should I do. What did I want? Nobody had ever asked me that question in relation to my parents before. I told him I needed to make one phone call first. I called my mother on a Wednesday afternoon. I had not spoken to her in 11 years. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting. I asked her one question, just one. I did not ask about the kidney. I asked her why. Why, at the kitchen table, on a Sunday in November when I was 16, she had sat at the other end and said nothing. She cried. What she said after the crying was, "I didn't know what to do." 11 years. And the answer was that she didn't know what to do. I sat with that for a moment. I let it be what it was, which was not enough, and also, I realized, the most honest thing she had ever said to me. Then she told me something I had not known. My father did not know she had written. The letter, the call to Dr. Osai, all of it her idea, in secret without his knowledge. He had not asked. He had not apologized. He did not know she was trying to fix what he had broken. That changed something, not everything, but something. I thanked her. I ended the call. Then I sat very still and I thought about who I wanted to be, not for them, for me, on the other side of this decision. I called my father from a number he did not recognize. He answered cautiously. When I said my name, the line went very quiet. I told him I knew about his kidneys. I told him I knew my mother had written without his knowledge. I told him I had already been tested for compatibility. There was a long silence. And then, for the first time in 11 years, my father spoke to me. I knew what I was going to do before he finished speaking. I had known since I sat at the counter in my coat and read my mother's letter a third time. I just needed to hear his voice first. I needed to understand exactly what I was deciding and who I was deciding it as. I called Dr. Osai the next morning. "You have been waiting to find out what I decided. I am going to tell you, but I need you to understand something first. The decision was never really about them." I said yes. I want to be precise about why, because the reason matters more than the answer. I did not say yes because I forgave my father. I did not say yes because my mother's letter moved me, or because Dr. Osai's statistics frightened me. I said yes because when I stripped away everything about them and thought only about myself, I understood that I was capable of it, and that being capable of something and choosing not to do it because of pride would cost me more in the long run than the surgery would. I said yes as Nora, not as their daughter, as the woman who had built a life from nothing and knew, with complete certainty, that her value did not depend on whether they recognized it. The surgery happened on a Thursday morning. Marcus sat in the waiting room the entire time. My father and I have spoken 4 times since then. They are not easy conversations. They may never be. My mother writes short letters occasionally, not asking for anything, just writing. I read them. Sometimes I write back. I have not forgiven them the way movies suggest forgiveness looks. What I have done is something quieter and less dramatic than that. I have decided to carry it without letting it be the heaviest thing I own. A few months after the surgery, I took the box down from the top of the closet. I opened it for the first time. The photographs were exactly as I remembered. I looked at one for a long time, me at maybe 12, my parents on either side, everyone squinting into the sun. I put the photograph back, I put the box away, I made coffee. I sat at the table and I watched the morning come in through the window. Ordinary Tuesday, entirely mine. People ask me if I regret it. My answer is the same to both kinds. I did not make that decision for my father. I made it for the person I am still becoming. That person deserved to know what she was capable of. Now she does.